Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com where music comes to life. And my guest today is not only an incredibly talented vocalist, but he's a philanthropist who really uses his talent to give back. He has a brand new record out now called Time is a Thief, and it just perfectly encapsulates the sound and feel of Louisiana music. Please welcome Marc Broussard. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
My pleasure. And let's get started with Time as a Thief. Who did you work with to put the record together? Who plays on it with you?
Well, it's actually a really interesting story, man. So I was sitting on a batch of about 30 songs in March of 2020, and I figured that was a perfect time to go ahead and make a record.
Mhm.
And I had searched for a guy named Jeremy Most. Prior to that, I had searched for Jeremy for probably 2.5 years or so. Jeremy he had produced an album for a girl named Emily King that I just loved. It was the only thing I listened to for almost an entire year. But Jeremy is notoriously difficult to get in touch with, and after 2.5 years of searching for him, I kind of gave up and called an old buddy of mine named Eric Krasno and said, "Hey, look, I got a batch of 30 songs. I'm ready to make a record. I think you should produce it. I love everything that Eric's ever done. But before we get into the studio, why don't you and I try to write some new material just to maybe beat what I have on deck and kind of round off the edges of the album and get the juices flowing. So within about a week, Eric and I had written an entirely new record. He would just send me really high quality demos, and I would sit in my home studio and write to him and send him back the vocals that I'd tracked. And he just kept sending me more songs. So we had a whole new record in a week. And fast forward to September of last year, 2023, I was supposed to go out and track final vocals.
Mm.
And again, this was a very different process for me. Every record prior, I went into the studio with a band. We had a tracking session and an overdub session, and knocked out the album that way. But this was a very different process where Eric was responsible for all tracking, and he's a brilliant multi-instrumentalist. So I had plenty of faith that he could get it done. But I didn't. I just never had made a record like this. So
Mm.
about 2 weeks prior to September of 2023, I called him up just to make sure that I'm not going out to LA to waste my time. I wanted to make sure that we had a real plan. And sure enough, he assured me that he had everything mapped out and we were good to go. And right before we hung up the phone call, he says, "Oh, by the way, J-Mos is out here. Do you want me to ask him if he wants to work with us?" And I said, "What do you mean out here?" And he says, "Yeah, he's moving from the East Coast to the West Coast, and he's been living in my guest bedroom for 4 months." So this guy that I had tried to search for 2.5 years ended up being in the guest bedroom of the guy that I ended up calling to make the record. It was sort of the universe just kind of give me a little wink and a nod saying, we got you, brother.
Sometimes it just works like that. And as you're telling that, I mean, you're going on over the period of a couple of years. It had been 7 years since your last record of original music. What was it about this record that took such a long time to put together?
Well, the pandemic really put the kibosh on making the album any sooner. Um, and we dropped a couple of singles off of this album, off the stuff that Kraz and I had done together back in 22, I want to say. But making an original album is, for me, it's a grueling process. It's a very, very grueling process. The writing has historically taken a very long time because I don't want to put stuff out there that is not top notch. I don't fancy myself as an arranger. Um, I do really enjoy writing, but I don't enjoy arranging at all. And so getting together with other writers that are better arrangers than me is just a long process. It's a very, very long process. But really, the pandemic is the thing that held this thing up more than anything else.
And when you put out those first couple of singles in 22, and both those songs ended up making the record, do you also kind of use that as sort of a test to see? Because this record really kind of goes in a little different direction for you.
Yeah.
So is it almost testing the waters a little bit too to see if you should keep going forward with the idea in your head?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but really more than anything, it was just I wanted to get some music out to the
Mhm.
fans more than anything else. It's hard to say. It's really difficult for me to say whether or not I I use music to test the market because in all actuality, I don't think that making music in response to fan
Mhm.
response is a good idea. I think that what has set me up for success has been just being authentic and being authentically me. And so I make music that I enjoy listening to in the hopes that my fans will respond. I will say this though, when we started playing Fire live, I've never gotten a bigger response from an audience for any new song ever. I think we debuted in Atlanta back in 21, and it was the biggest response that I ever got to debuting a song.
And for me, I love the geography of music. Now, I think, New Orleans is sort of an entity unto itself, but
Sure.
for the rest of Louisiana, I mean, I always saw it as kind of a melting pot where you get the Memphis soul, the New Orleans jazz, the Delta blues that comes in, just kind of the funk of the South. And I think for the first time in your career, Time as a Thief touches on all of those.
Yeah.
And I think it's the first time that we really see you kind of embrace just all of that music and turn it out as your own.
Yeah.
Did you kind of think that way as you were putting it together?
Well, look, I mean, as much as as big a fingerprint that I have on this album, I think Kraz's signature is all over it. Kraz has done quite well with the locals in New Orleans, especially with the local music scene there. He's been embraced wholly as a homeboy, and his signature is all over this project. So I've got to give him a lot of credit when it comes to what we're talking about here. I'll say this: I think that this record is probably the most authentically me, while also, yeah, it's it's interesting because everybody that I've talked to says it's very different than everything you've done prior, but it's also very, very you. And I think it's a perfect description of what's going on here. Kraz just helped me kind of finally realize a vision for my own music that has kind of been we've been working towards for a long time.
Well, and it's funny because I think listening to your older records, you hear pieces of all of this. So
Sure.
this record's almost like you took the 20 years you've been recording and took something from each of that, and that's what creates Time as a Thief.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think it's very, very accurate. There have been times, look, I was a snob of a singer for a long time. As a fan of music, I've sort of rejected singers that didn't sing really well. Guys like Bob Dylan, even guys like Robert Plant, I didn't find very attractive to my ears until probably my mid 20s. Discovering Blake Mills at probably 35 or 36 years old all of a sudden opened me up to a whole new world, and influenced me in ways that I did not anticipate. And so I started to introduce more. I started to introduce things to my music that were broader than just straight up soul and R&B. But I was raised on guys like Brian McKnight and Stevie Wonder and and I really held singers to a very, very high standard as a result for a long, long time. So discovering guys like Robert Plant and Blake Mills opened me up and allowed me to kind of spread my wings a little bit in the last decade or so. Um, the loss of my grandmother and the loss of several close friends also inspired a sort of introspective approach to songwriting. And so there have been albums in the past that I'm very, very proud of, and I think do a pretty good job of displaying what it is that I find appealing about my voice. But at the end of the day, I think Time as a Thief is absolutely the most stellar representation of what it is that I do.
Mm. And I mentioned earlier in the introduction your philanthropy, and you have your S.O.S series of records that all kind of give back and benefit various charities. The last one, 2023, is an incredible collection of blues songs. Talk a little bit about what led to the S.O.S series and who that all benefits.
Man, I don't even really know how to describe the pull to do that. It took a lot of teeth pulling with my managers because at the time I didn't have the kind of money to give away, and my managers assured me that I didn't have that kind of money. But I was positive that it was going to be the right move. For some reason, I don't know if it's metaphysical or what have you, but I was just convinced that we needed to do it. And luckily, I was right. And now my managers, they go along with every harebrained scheme of mine that I have. Um, it's been so much more rewarding than uh, I initially thought. Not only have we been able to raise tens of thousands of dollars on every one of these projects for the various causes that we've supported, but it's also allowed me to record some of my favorite music in my life that I never thought I would get to record. It's allowed me to make connections with living legends. Um, it's allowed me a little bit more space in between original albums so that I can actually focus on the writing and make sure that we put in the best product out there. But it's also given my fans a sense of what music inspired me growing up, which was always really the original intention. S.O.S. 1 was actually a response to my sophomore effort being shelved by Island Def Jam. After we released Karen Crow, we made another album. L.A. Reid was the new CEO, and he didn't want to put the record out for whatever reason. I don't even know what his reasoning was, but he decided to shelve the album. It had been 3 years since Karen Crow was out. Promoters were no longer willing to book us. And so we decided to make a new album. And instead of going back into the writer's room, we decided to make a covers album. So the first project was really a charity project for us to get back out on the road and have something to promote. Luckily, Vanguard Records stepped up to the table and put that album out. And it was a beautiful success story. It allowed us to get back out on the road. It allowed us to get overseas for the first time because it got picked up in Holland. And once I went independent, my first project, I think, was a Christmas album.
Yep.
After we went indie from my second deal with Vanguard. So I went from Island Def Jam to Vanguard to Atlantic to back to Vanguard. And by the end of the first album cycle at that second round of Vanguard, my managers were convinced that we could go independent. We made a Christmas album, and then I made the case for this charity project. They were adamant that we really didn't have the funds to do it, that I needed the money. And I said, I don't need the money. We're good. Let's give this money away. And it was maybe the best career move of my career.
And you mentioned being on the road, and as far as touring goes, I believe on the day we're recording that you start your tour tonight.
Well, we've been out for about a week now.
Oh, okay. Now, um, your tour goes straight through the first quarter of next year. I'll actually be catching you here in Connecticut, I believe in early March. But talk a bit about your live show. Who's in the band with you? What can fans expect when they come see a Marc Broussard show?
So I had the same guys in my band for a very, very long time. Some of my closest friends. Uh, the pandemic kind of changed that, and it sort of reordered things. My drummer of 18 years got off the road officially and took a job at home. My guitar player, Joe Stark, at the time was his wife was in the final stages of a battle with breast cancer, so he had gotten off the road about a year prior to March of 2020. My bass player ended up taking a gig with Trombone Shorty, and so once we started up again, I was in need of building an entirely new band, and that was a very difficult process. My drummer, especially, he had some really massive shoes to fill. Ultimately, I knew that I wanted guys that were based in Louisiana. I think um, for economic reasons, but also for vibe reasons. There's a groove, there's a pocket that exists in South Louisiana that kind of doesn't exist elsewhere. Um, so I ended up going through about, I went through at least two or three bass players and I think six drummers in about a year and a half. Ultimately, thankfully, I found the right group of guys. So Bobby Schneck Jr. is on guitar. Bobby's a guy that I found through my engineer several years ago, and has been on the radar since. He's a brilliant musician and a doll of a dude. He kind of got his start in the music business as a tour manager. He was actually tour managing the Royal Southern Brotherhood when he was 19 years old. And but he's a brilliant player. I mean, maybe the best guitar player I've ever had. He recommended Devin Kerrigan on bass. Devin is a New Orleans native and he's a phenomenal player. The guy is a student of the instrument and really, I think before anybody else in the band had my entire catalog memorized and was ready to go. So I can call any audible that I want to with Devin. Jason Parfait is on keys and sax. Jason started out with me. He called me up. We had a show at home in Lafayette, Louisiana, and he called me up and said, "Hey, man, I'll come and play for free." And I said, "All right, no problem," And he shows up and just played his ass off. And so he had always kind of been in and out of the band. Whenever we needed a horn section, he was our guy to put the section together. And he called me about 2 years ago and said, I play keys too. And I said, that's it. Because I'd been traveling as a four-piece for years. I wanted to add keys. And once Jason said he could play keys, I remember that he played well. And so we threw him on the tour. He's playing keys and sax and singing backgrounds. It's kind of a mad scientist routine over stage right. And then finally, we landed on Terry Scott Jr. on drums after 5 previous guys that all did very, very well. They just weren't exactly the right fit. Terry is a phenomenal drummer and he's a better singer than I am. He grew up as the son of the choir director at his father's church. So he grew up in the church. Again, just a brilliant player. And I think this is the team that I'm going to rock out with for the foreseeable future.
So Time as a Thief is out. Your tour is kicking off and going for the next few months. What do you see coming up for you? Will it be kind of another wait between original music? Will there be another S.O.S. record? What do you see the next year or two bringing?
Well, the Joe Bonamassa project that we released last year has done so well that we've decided to go back into the studio next January and record an original album.
Okay.
I've got 10 songs written for that project. We'll do a little bit more writing before we get there, but we're going back in for an original blues project in January, and we're going to put out another S.O.S. next year. So hopefully with between Time as a Thief and these other 2 projects, we'll get 3 albums out in the span of about 16 months. That's the
Fantastic.
goal, is to put out as much music as possible.
We'll take it. We've been spending some time here with Marc Broussard. The record is called Time is a Thief. It's out everywhere now. He's on tour for the next 3, 4 months. Marc, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Best of luck with the record and can't wait to check the show out when you get here in March.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. Have a great day, brother.
You as well.